Lesson 28, shutter speed and blurred photos. Back in lesson 12, you learned that a slow shutter speed can cause blurry photos sometimes. If you've got a moving subject and you're using a slow shutter speed, as your subject's moving and you take a photo, it can be blurred if your shutter speed's too slow. The other reason is that if you're hand holding your camera and you're using a slow shutter speed and your camera moves during your exposure, it can cause the whole image to be blurred. The cool thing though with slow shutter speeds is that you can use them really creatively in ways that you can take photographs that we can't actually ever see with our eyes. Think of images like waterfalls with silky smooth water, or race cars that are blurred or where the background's blurred. These have all been created purposefully using slow shutter speeds. A moving subject might blur because of the relationship between the speed of the subject and the shutter speed you've chosen. The faster your subject is moving, the faster shutter speed you'll need to choose to be able to freeze the motion. When you want a moving subject to blur, you must choose an appropriate shutter speed depending on the speed of the subject and how much blur you want to see in your pictures. And learning to balance the speed of your shutter with the speed of your subject is part of the creative fun of using slow shutter speeds. And if your shutter speed's slow and you move your camera as you're taking your photo, if you're not holding it well, then your whole image will be blurred. This is known as camera shake blur, and it depends a lot on how steadily you can hold your camera and the image stabilization in your camera. When you move a camera intentionally as you're taking a photograph, this is called intentional camera movement and can create some really interesting effects. And the amount of blur created will depend on the amount of camera movement and the shutter speed. And so when you want to avoid blurring from camera movement while you're using a slow shutter speed, you need to use a tripod or switch on your image stabilization or just hold your camera really steadily. Most people will find that they can hand hold a camera at a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second, some down to 1/60th of a second, and still get a sharp photo. Again, this does depend on the image stabilization in your camera. And using a tripod or a faster shutter speed will help you avoid problems caused by camera movement. And in low light situations, if you're already using a wide aperture and have got your shutter speed as slow as you can manage it, and you're still getting an underexposed photo, this is the time to raise your ISO and choose a higher ISO setting, because this will make the camera's sensor more responsive to the light that there is. So it's always important to be aware of the shutter speed, and if you want it to be slow, what kind of effects can you get from either a moving subject or intentional camera movement. Lesson 28, practical exercise, shutter speed and blurred photos. In this exercise, you'll get a better understanding of the relationship between a slow shutter speed and blurred photos. With your camera set to shutter priority, put it on a stable surface or on a tripod and take a photo of a number of different subjects. If some of them are moving, this will be good. Use a variety of shutter speeds. Try and choose a slow shutter speed with moving subjects, so in at least some of the pictures, your subject will be blurred. As you're taking your photos, pay attention to the shutter speed and the speed that your subject's moving. And if you can vary the subject speed, that's really good, because it'll give you a better idea of the relationship between how fast your shutter speed is and how fast your subject is moving. You should be able to see that the faster your subject's moving, the faster shutter speed that you'll need to freeze it, and the faster your subject is moving, the more blurred it will appear, even at slower and slower shutter speed increments. And if you've got a flash, experiment using some flash in these photos as well, particularly the ones where you're using a slow shutter speed. Then take another series of photos hand holding your camera and setting your shutter speed down to at least 1/10 of a second or even slower, and intentionally move your camera as you're taking the photographs. Experiment with different compositions and different types of camera movement, moving it from side to side or up and down, or even in a circular motion, or any way that you think is going to give you the most interesting photographs. Again, experiment with different shutter speeds and see the relationship between the speed of the shutter and the type of movement that you're doing with your camera. And as you're doing this experiment, you can even try zooming your lens as you're taking the photo to see what effect this has when you're using a slow shutter speed. And again, try popping in a little bit of flash, even using the flash on camera if that's all you've got. The main points in this lesson are: subjects might blur because of the relationship between how fast they're moving and the shutter speed. Creative use of slow shutter speeds can produce some fun results. Using a slow shutter speed when hand-holding your camera can cause blurring. Practice this to improve your photography. Think about how fast your subject is moving and choose an appropriate shutter speed for the amount of blur that you want in your photos.